Good morning and welcome to our live talk program. This is Lloyd Grubb here, your host on Revive Reform Radio. During our live talk program, I'm covering finance on this year, Tuesday, Rise and Shine. And today I'm looking at the topic why they trust in oppression and perverseness and stay therein. So, welcome again. Thanks for joining me here. Let us pray. Thank you, dear Lord, for your blessings and your love towards us and the way you continue to guide us along that we might be true and honest in all that we do and we might bless those that we come in contact with. May you be with us, we pray, for Christ's sake. Amen. So thanks for joining me here as we do our live talk program covering the topic why they trust in oppression and perverseness and stay therein. So we continue from where we left off yesterday, and we're still dealing with the theme when the righteous is overcome and their message is rejected. What are the results for home, church, and society? And so this is important when it comes on to, like, as I say, for finance or for financial matters, because oftentimes what it seems to drive society for the most part is, love of money or needs, just your regular day-to-day needs. But at the end of the day, we're told that, and we see through history that it's always honesty is the best policy. It's better to be honest and be true, and you'll be blessed. So, why do people trust in oppression? Why do they trust in lies and all kind of things like that to make money? Why do they trust in doing all kind of bad activities to be able to stay forward or to be ahead? It's simply because it works short term, and it can work. You don't have to put the work in. You can just go and rob somebody, and as you rob somebody, then you get your benefit. So our main text is found in Isaiah chapter 30, verse 8. So Isaiah chapter 30, verse 8 is our main text, but the topic I get it from Isaiah 30, verse 12. So in Isaiah chapter 30, verse 12, it reads, wherefore, thus says the Holy One of Israel, because thou despise this word and trust in oppression and perverseness and stay therein. So the person trusts in oppression and perverseness. And so why would somebody trust in in oppression and perverseness? And because, as I say, when you oppress somebody, when you rob somebody, when you con somebody out of their money, whatever it is, it yields some short-term dividend. So normally the word that is used there, and oshek, which is normally for, it talks about fraud, where you injure somebody by fraud, and you cause distress in somebody's life, and you cruelly extort somebody, or you use deceitfulness to get something. You get things by deceitfulness. So you're not being straight. So somebody could lie and get your money, get your labor, whatever it is. That's oppression. Do all kind of oppressive or wicked things to be able to stay on top. So why do people do this, right? And the simple answer, obviously, is the reason why it is done is because it's gain. The person is gaining something from doing this type of thing. And because they gain, then the whole idea then is, well, I'm getting something. So since I'm getting something from being oppressive, then there's value there, and that's really where the value comes in, and that's why people do it. So I'm gonna go into this in a second, just sorting on some stuff here, and then I'll get going. So notice here now, I'm going to read through the whole of Isaiah chapter 30 and pick up from where we left off yesterday. So in Isaiah 30, verse 8 onward, it says here, now go and write it before them in a tablet and note it in a book, that it may be for a time to come forever and ever, that this is a rebellious people, lying children, children that will not hear the law of the Lord, which say to the seer, see not, and to the prophet, prophesy not unto us right things. Speak unto us smooth things, prophesy deceit. Get you out of the way, and turn aside out of the path. cause the Holy One of Israel to cease from before us. Wherefore, thus says the Holy One of Israel, because you despised this word, and trust in oppression and perverseness, and stay therein, therefore this iniquity shall be to you as a breach ready to fall, swelling out in a wall, whose breaking cometh suddenly at an instant, and ye shall break it as the breaking of a potter's vessel, that is broken in pieces. Ye shall not spare, so that there shall not be found in the bursting of it a sherd to take fire from the earth, or to take water withal out of the pit. For thus says the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest shall ye be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength, and you would not. So the person would not, because they have figured out a different way to do life, right? They have figured out a different way to do life, and they decide that this is the way they're going to do life. And so because they're going to do life that way, they trust in oppression. They trust in these lying words that will not profit them. And this is basically what my premise is. So my topic again, which is taken from verse 12, it says, why they trust in oppression and perverseness and stay therein. Now, the answer to the question really is because when people are pressing, doing all kind of ill-gotten things to get gain or to trick people, like con people, is that they think that ultimately it is not going to come back to bite. There is no payment. And because of, as the Bible says, as the prophet says, that because payment for evil work is not executed quickly, the man of sin, humanity think that they can get away with it. And so history just have so much examples, and our current life have so much example that crime does not pay, sin does not pay. And so people think, well, I'm going to get away with it, so I do it. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, Daniel 7, verse 25, the Bible states, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until times, and dividing of times. So as I was saying yesterday, when I read this text at first, and this text is primarily my backdrop for what I'm talking about. When I read this text at first, then it seems like somebody that's oppressing others, they're winning. It is working. But yet, what we know from history, the history that covers this prediction, is that as they did the oppression, as they did the destruction that we saw throughout the Dark Ages, that the whole society was kept in a very low experience. It was constantly war, famine, and pestilence. Those are the three words that could use to describe that 1,260 years. That as long as they maintained this oppressive state and they blaspheme against God and they did all that type of stuff, it didn't mean that says it was success. You know, it's like watching our modern day people who today, you know, many people say that they evolve and that they're, you know, they're the survival of the fittest and it, you know, all that type of stuff. But you look at the end result of that, and all you see is just a lot of suicide and depression and stuff like that. So when people are oppressive, I think they continue oppressiveness because they don't see that it always backfires on them and their loved one. So why do people do this? Because they probably be in power. You know, it's like if you're a gangbanger, so to speak, or you're a mafioso or whatever you call it, and you're at the top of the ghetto, well, I guess at least you're the top of the ghetto, right? Everybody's below you, but you're suffering, they're suffering, nobody having a good life, but at least you're having the best of the worst life. And that's kind of really what it is. It's like, you know, presiding over a piece of garbage or presiding over a pile of garbage. And I think that's where the idea is. You know, like I'm at the top of the food chain, but I'm really like a scavenger. So if you look at the Dark Ages, that's how the Dark Ages would be characterized. Characterized that the more sin and the more oppression is the more death and destruction. But the more death and destruction is the more they continue. Like, it don't matter how much death and destruction came their way, they just like keep digging in. And the end result was just their death and destruction and just war, famine, pestilence, the amount of diseases and the amount of wars. The wars does not stop. And you look at people who have this policy in our modern time now. that there's constantly wars. And they come up with all kind of thing, autocracy against democracy and whatever silliness they come up with, embargoes and stuff like that. It's just death and destruction in the homeland. But they're quiet about that because they don't want basically somebody to know that says what they're doing is not working. So this is why we have to take note of what happened in the Dark Ages, because we know the prophecy tells us that as the society gets more away from God, it's going to get more oppressive, and then they're going to feel the results of the Dark Ages and see that it doesn't work. But it's not that they're going to change their mind. We who are righteous, are we who subscribe to the Bible, learn these lessons so that we don't join with them and we recognize what's going on. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 7 onwards, Revelation chapter 13, verse 5 through 7, it says, "And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemy. And power was given unto him to continue for 42 months. So if you do 30 times 42, you get 1,260. If you do times and divide the times, you get 1,260. And we know this was the reign of the Catholic Church in the Dark Ages. And they created the Dark Ages. This is a Christian church that apostatized and started to go against God. And they presided over what we call the dark period of the earth's history, where just war, famine, and pestilence, constant war, constant famine, constant pestilence. And just in case somebody think that they were always winning, they were not always winning. Hence why you have Portugal, Spain, Italy, and certain part of the southern parts of Europe, Western Europe as darker skin or more olive color, because they were constant wars, constant conquests, and they were conquests overrun and stuff like that. So it was not a good time. But yet you could believe that, have you ever been to a museum and look at the art that came out of that period of time and how dark and depressing it is, and just crucifixion and blood and death and destruction and vampires and gargoyles and stuff. Have you ever been in one of the Western in European countries and see the churches? The churches are like a scary movie. It is unbelievable, dark and sinister. Even churches I only saw churches in England, but you can go online and look at some of these pictures, and they look like demons are there. It is fascinating. It would be scary walking past those churches because they look like something out of like a Vincent Price movie or some type of vampire movie. But that's the lifestyle that they live. That literally you can see the darkness. And remember, the culmination of the 1,260 years of darkness and oppression was slavery. Isn't that fascinating? So when I read this to you, understand this is not only historical, biblical, prophetic, but this is reality. You can see the final, what you say, at the end of the 1,260 years of this system, it blessed slavery and it gave us what we're told as probably the most darkest and demonic system that ever existed on the face of the planet. That is show you how powerful this Bible text is. And the end result of it, that they just get worse and worse and worse until they say, we know what we're going to do. We're going to do something that we have never done before in a brutality and demonic way as never been seen. But that was the end product of 1,260 years. That was the system has gotten perfect. So when we talk about this, we understand what we see now. So remember, when you talk about Revelation 13, where we're going to, we talk about oppression, is that in the end we're told that they will institute the mark of the beast against God's people so that they can't buy or sell and that they should be killed, which would be a reinstating of the Dark Ages oppression, going out hunting down the righteous. And so this is coming and this is future. But if you can see, again, that's oppression. It is the oppressive nature. But why do people do this? Because it's satanic. And it shows the failure of humanity and divinity in humanity. So we know what's coming, and this is what's coming. You can see, because somebody say, how do you see it? Because it's the preparation is being made. It's a constant exercise in embargo and whatever is they call that embargo, where they embargo or sanctions and embargo. They're getting better at it. And I think I was looking at the list, and I think Iran has about 4,000 sanctions, and Russia has about 8,000. But if you read the Bible and Revelation, by the time they come to the mark of the beast, I think they'll have 144,000 sanctions. That's what they're going to do. This is going to be amazing. This is going to be the most sanctions. We're going to make what they have in Russia look like it's a joke. Because if you read the Bible, that's what it is. It's going to be about 144,000 sanctions. I guess that's what they have to put up, right? Or somewhere north of that. It can't be south, right? So this is what we have. So this is that oppress. So why do people oppress, right? Why do human beings do like sanctions and do the dark ages and stuff like that? So that's what I want to go through here with you now. So so important to note. So I'll read Revelation 13, verse 5 through 7 again, and then we'll move on to why I came here. Right, so I'm going to move on. So notice here, and there was given him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemy, and power was given unto him to continue for 42 months, 1,260 years. This culminated in slavery. So it started with a persecution of the righteous, and they just got darker and more sinister. And he opened his mouth and blasphemed against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in. So this is why where does evolution, the theory of evolution, emanates from, and you can really understand geographically what we're talking about. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints. So this is somebody fight. You can imagine the saints. So I'm sure if you drive around, you see saint this and saint that. But as Christ says, they kill the prophet and they make an institution in the name of the prophet. It's amazing. And to overcome them. So this is where I used to be very puzzled. Say, if they overcome them, that's not positive. And power was given unto him over all kindred and tongue and nation. So that's why, because of this power, that's why I speak to you in English and not Swahili. So Micah chapter 3, verse 9 through 12. Micah chapter 3, verse 9 through 12. It says, hear this, I pray you, ye head of the house of Jacob, and princes of the house of Israel, that abhor judgment and pervert all equity. So if you're oppressive, you can't accept judgment. That's why if you're going to churches, you find them very aggressive against judging. You know, you can't judge. You can't judge. That's what they say. They use that statement of Jesus Christ and pervert the concept of judgment. Very crazy. Anyhow, and pervert all equity. So this is why if you ever talk about justice, they'll be the first to say, "Are you a victim? Are you wounded?" They mock you basically. Like you can't talk about wickedness because they say that says, I guess you're being wounded and you're a victim, or you have a victim mentality, and that's how they shut up people when people are saying, "Listen, stop doing evil." So this, and you've seen it. It goes all the time. They always use, don't judge. You don't know the heart, and they always say, "Oh, are you a victim? Are you being a victim?" But I want to show you here, the Lord is marvelous. Who are the victims? Is not just who you think is the victims, the obvious victims. They built up Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. So he's saying, how they build this? They didn't build it by their hard work. He says, Christ saying they're building up Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity. So if you're building up something, well, it's being built, so why not continue? The head thereof judge for reward, and the priests thereof teach for hire. The prophets thereof divine for money. Yet will they lean upon the Lord and say, is not the Lord among us? None evil can come upon us. So everything they're doing with wickedness. But then they'll go and say, oh, the Lord is with us. We have the mega churches. We have the big institution. But is that so? Where's most of the suicide? Where most of the poverty? Is it amongst their members? But they say, but look at this church. You see, this is what the Jews were doing with Christ. Christ preaching, and he says, not one stone will be left upon another. And the disciples said, but look at the building. Yeah, but look at the people. The people are filled with demons. The people are suffering. The people are oppressed by the Romans. Oh no, but look at this. We're doing well. Therefore shall Zion for your sake be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountain of the house of the high places of the Pharisees, and the mountains of the place of the high Pharisees shall become heaps. In Micah chapter 2, verse 1, Micah chapter 2, verse 1, it says, woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it because it is in the power of their hand. So they can, so they do it. So this is where somebody say, well, okay. So again, notice my main concept here is that the righteous is overcome and their message is rejected. Is it well? Does everything go good for the people who reject their message? Notice in verse 2, they covet fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage. That means his future and really even his past, to be honest. So somebody said, well, okay, so they're winning, right? The victim is mourning, and if I mourn, they say, oh, you have a victim mentality. And then I have to go research. What's that? Me have a victim mentality? I don't think so. But, they'll say whatever because you speak out and you speak out for those who are poor. And, this is to this day. I've always had this issue, I guess, because I always talk a certain way. They'll say, well, if you speak for the poor, I have a victim mentality. And I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about. What is this concept? Are we supposed to speak out for those who are being poor? So notice, they covet a field and they take it by violence. So if the people who had the field taken from them cry out, they say, oh, you've been a victim because you're the loser. But is that the real story? Is that the only story? Is only people who speak out are victims? The people who are oppressors, they're not victims. They don't have God against them. Right? If God is against you, God can reach in and in your palace, your crystal palace, whip your buttocks. But that's the fact. But, again, that's why we read the Bible and history. So again, with all the oppression, was it great in the Dark Ages when the Catholic Church reigned supreme and reigned by oppression? Or was it war, famine, pestilence? Is Revelation right or Revelation wrong? Was it great for the people when they fled from Europe and came to America? What were they fleeing from? Were they fleeing from happy times, or were they fleeing from being raped, the little kids being sodomized? You see, that's where you have to understand what's happening. But you can look at it and it looks so beautiful. Look at these big buildings, big edifices with the gargoyles. And I've seen this in England. You can go and see churches with gargoyles and ghosts and all kind of weird creatures. And you'll be like, what all that demonic stuff about? But when you start hearing the history of the asylums and what they did to each other, you realize, whoa, this is everybody. Plymouth Rock, I think, fell on everybody, even fallen people in Europe. So notice in Psalms chapter 10, verse 16 through 18, the Lord is king forever and ever. The heathens are perished out of the land by heaps. The Lord, thou hast heard the desire of the humble. Thou wilt prepare their heart. Thou wilt cause thy ear to hear, to judge the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of earth may no more oppress. So, again, by the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread. But humanity has come up with many different ways and methods to eat bread. And long term, I'm going to say long term, because short term it can't work. You know what I'm saying? I'm sure you can go to a bakery and pull a gun and rob the bakery and you can eat bread. You can do it and get away with it and live to tell the story. But long term, that's going to come back to bite. And that's the reason why. Why do people oppress? Why do people trust in oppression? Because short term, it's a short term thinking. And they're not observing what they have created. They have created an oppressive environment. And an oppressive environment always backfire on the oppressor. So throughout the history, what the history to me, when we study, look at Revelation chapter 13, Daniel chapter 7, and so forth, what we're really telling you about is that it's telling you that, yes, the person might speak perverseness and blasphemies. The person might oppress, the person might do all of this. But it doesn't mean that it is well for that person. So because they don't see that, they keep doing it because they think it works, and it never works. This is why, as you know, like the country we live in, because I'm going to get to the finance part in a second, just laying this thing up. The country we live in is a boom and bust system. Why? Because it's always boom bust, boom bust, boom bust. Because it's a constant toying with oppressing each other. And then the system break because it's got out of control. Show you in a second. In Isaiah chapter 1, verse 16 through 20, it states, "Wash you and make you clean, and put away the evil of your doings from before mine eyes. Cease to do evil, learn to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow." If you ever try this in any mainline church, you will find out, because they'll quick start saying you shouldn't judge. Quick start saying that you have a victim mentality. So the prophets of old will be a victim mentality, because here Isaiah is telling you, listen, you need to seek judgment. They're like, nah, we don't do that. Relieve the oppressed. Nah, we ain't doing that. Judge the fatherless and plead for the widow. Oh, we definitely not doing that. We go accuse them of all kind of stuff. So, okay. So when you're oppressed, then who's going to call out for you? Who's going to be there for you? As you know, the famous saying, I'm going to get that saying right in my head, but there's this famous saying that came out, I think, World War II, that the guy basically is opining or lamenting that when they came for the Jews, he said nothing. When they came for the black people or whoever, I don't know who he come from, the poor people, whoever they came for after, and he said nothing. And ultimately, he says when they came for him, there was nobody else to say nothing. And that's what it is, because people believe, oh, okay, it's just somebody is getting eaten, I'm going to shut my mouth. And that's always happened. So when it's their time, then they look around and there's nobody, because like the environment is created that nobody speak up for the oppressed, the fatherless. But here's the thing. When the bombs start dropping on the what they call the SS and the Nazis and stuff like that, and the people, the regular civilians, who was there to say anything for them? They just got bombed to smithereens. You see, ultimately come back around, but they had their run for a little while. And that's the thing with all this. When wicked people are doing their thing, you watch them and you be like, man, they don't know they're going to get cut down. But their day's coming. But it takes time. And time becomes the great equalizer of things. But also time becomes the destruction of wicked people, because they don't know that their time is coming. And they always go backwards. So when they came, and they, as I said last week, they took the jobs from Detroit and Camden and St. Louis and all the places that black people had fled from the oppression of the Southerners and fled to these cities for refuge, because they could not survive in these rural areas because of they were being lynched and stuff. The people from Kentucky and West Virginia and Tennessee, they said nothing. And then now when they came now, the same robber barons and the same oligarchs that we have here in America came and took their jobs. There was nobody to say anything. So they end up getting a taste of what happened to others. But when it was happening to others, they're like, we good. So now you listen to them and they, oh, China is making everything. China is making everything. And you're like, okay, China is making everything, but weren't something being made here? And when you claim free trade act of the civil rights because you didn't want to pay black people the proper money, then now when they got beaten up and the society got flooded with crack, nobody said anything. Not much. You can hardly find anybody who was saying anything. Then now when fentanyl, opiates start flooding their communities and they lost their jobs, and then they're not living in the same experience and dying at high numbers, filling up stadiums every year from just opiate. Who is there to say something? Are the senators going to say it? Are the business people in America going to say anything? No, they're not going to say anything, because why? The oppressive system now is becoming monstrous, or has become monstrous. And they will realize that it didn't matter, that oppressiveness in humanity always was there. It was always there, and it was there straight through Europe. Remember, every oppression, when they wipe out 3 of their own kindreds in Europe, there was no Chinese to be blamed or no black people to be blamed. It was amongst themselves. There's something about human nature that we will oppress each other. And the Bible deals with that. But if you say to somebody, oh, don't, we shouldn't do this, they say, oh, you have a victim mentality. And I always look at them and say, listen, you're going to be victimized. And it might be sooner or later, unless you kill yourself, sooner or later, if you're oppressive, it's going to come back. And I've seen it come back to people in nursing homes when they're old, their kids take them out. They're scared of their kids because the kids are about to take them out because the kids are like, listen, you need to die so I can go enjoy a cruise. So notice here, if you're willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. Also, Christ says here, come let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. If you be willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured with the sword, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. So the person that's there, instead of you go talking to one of these younger person in Congress or Senate, you say, listen, we need to not oppress the poor. They'll be like, nah, we're not going to do that because we on the top of the food chain, baby. We're at the top of the food chain. We're not going to happen. I'd be like, they don't understand. Listen, your kids are coming for you. Your husband or your wife is coming for you. God is not sleeping and he is not mocked. And so you see this and you be like, they're scared. Like, listen, they're scared of their own kids. Right? But you can't tell them when they're at the height of their glory that it's going to come back and bite. And that's what the problem with people who are oppressed. Why do people do this? Oppress and trust in perverseness because they don't believe that the perverseness will come their way. They don't believe that says one day the jig is going to be up, the richest of them, even up to the Epstein and the people who run with him. They don't believe that. But it comes. And even if it don't come, there's help for them. In Isaiah chapter 58, verse 5, Isaiah 58, verse 5 says, is it such a fast that I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Wilt thou call this a fast and an acceptable day of the Lord? Is not the fast that I have chosen to loose the band of wickedness and to undo the heavy burden and to let the oppressed go free and that you break every yoke? So the Philadelphian church in church history, they realized that they need to do this. And they fought hard, literally on the battlefield and in preaching to let the oppressed go free. The ladies in church, what a joke. So they broke every yoke. Their intention, listen, we need to help the poor, the fatherless, the widow. And so they created these organs and institutions to do that. By the time we come to probably World War II or stuff like that, there was just total apostasy from that. And they just start coming up with these wicked institutions like the United Nations and IMF and the World Bank and all these evil institutions. They almost repented. The children repented of what the parents did. So they can continue oppressing people with these fakeness like United Nations. It sounds so cute. It's a bunch of oppressors and evildoers. So notice here, it's not to deal thy bread to the hungry, yeah, and to bring the poor that are cast out to thy house. When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide thyself, and not thyself from thine own flesh, because you can be that too. Then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thy health spring forth speedily, and thy righteousness shall go before thee, and the glory of the Lord shall be thy reward. Then shalt thou call, and the Lord shall answer. Thou shalt cry, and he shall say, Here I am. If thou take away from the midst of thee the yoke, the putting forth of the finger, the speaking vanity, if thou draw thy soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then shall thy light rise in obscurity and thy darkness as the noonday. The Lord shall guide thee continually and satisfy thy soul in drought, and make fat thy bones, and thou shalt be like a watered garden, like a spring of waters that never fail. I'm going to go now to Luke chapter 19, verse 41 through 44. I read this yesterday. I want to read it again before I go to some other readings here that I want to get to. So notice here, and when he was come near, which is Jesus, he beheld the city and wept over it, saying, If thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belongeth unto thy peace. But now they are hid from thee. For the day shall come upon thee, that thine enemy shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children with thee, and they shall not leave thee one stone upon another, because thou knowest not the time of thy visitation. Now you read the story and you say, Christ said this to the Jews 2,000 plus years ago. Ain't this fascinating that this has been a repeated history of them over and over again? And yet, every time they get a beat down and they come back more wicked and brutal. And you look at their behavior to this day, and it's always war, famine, pestilence upon them. And they don't learn. They keep, when they get an opportunity, they become very oppressive. And they start to lord over people, and they're just known as people who oppress people and oppress things. It's like they never learn. And whoever always do this, they never learn. The history of them is always the same. So what did they do? They murdered Christ, and then what happened? Then their blood be upon them. There is a pour out of beat down and oppression. But when people are at the top of the game, they don't see no value in blessing others. They don't see no value in reaching out to others and looking out for the poor and oppressed. But when their beatdown come, then you can see it's brutal. And this always happen over and over again. And this is what it is. And so I want to go now to this reading. So I started reading this reading yesterday, and most actually I got, I think, halfway through. And it's found in The Great Controversy, written by Ellen G. White, and it's page 29 to 33. So I have probably 2 reading and a text to go with you here to lay out a foundation so we can get somewhere in the next few days. So if I can find, okay, right there. So I'm gonna pick up where I left off. So one of the things I brought this this statements to you here. Brought this statement to you here because I wanted to show you that when it was time for them to kill Christ, they were big and bad and bold, but they didn't realize that says their day was coming. Now Christ predicted that yes, they're gonna kill me, but their day is coming. Their beatdown was gonna come, and it's gonna be brutal. And so what it is that by the time after they kill Christ and they start going after the disciples, they start going after each other. And that's what it is with a system that's oppressive. That normally you think that the oppressor will stop at wherever they stop. They will just oppress, say, whoever it is and whatever that group is, but they won't turn on each other. So one of the things throughout history that you have to learn, and I've learned over the years, and it's important to observe, and then if you come to the conclusion, you come to the conclusion. But I've come to that conclusion, that they always start with whoever they're going after to oppress, but they always end where they oppress their own. And that's what the key is. So if you remember what I read yesterday from this reading, was that it starts, I started reading where she's saying, look, they were oppressing each other. They start to pillage and kill each other. It was a bloodbath going on in the city outside of what the Romans were about to do. Because when people are wicked, you almost always think that, say, if somebody treats you bad, it means they're treating their family good. It could be so, but most of the time it's not so. And I'll go as far as say, I don't know every case, but I've never seen a case where a nasty person is just not nasty to you, they're nasty to their families. It's just a fact. A person that is oppressive is going to be oppressive to their family. They don't have family members, they have inmates. And they have people who are captured animals and oppressed. But they might act as if, oh no, they're probably the nicest person in their family, it's just you. Anytime you see a bad characteristic of a person, trust me, and don't trust me, observe life and tell me if I'm wrong or right. So I've learned this over the years, and one of the quickest way I can show this is in this chapter that the Jews turned on each other. But when you study the Dark Ages, we realize is that they were oppressing each other. Any environment that's oppressive to either a stranger, fatherless, or widow, trust me, they're not going to be oppressive. And I say trust me because I'm just using this as a phrase. But I guarantee I have observed that, and you have to observe for your own self, that they're not going to stop there. A nasty, wicked, evil, oppressive person is just nasty, wicked, and oppressive. Period. It just, they might act as if, well, I'm for these people. Just think about it. They said that there's drugs flowing in like Kentucky, Mississippi, Alabama, so on and so on. You can keep going. Who bringing those drugs? Huh? You see, they never tell you that. They make it sound like, oh, well, look in the prison. It's all these black people locked up in prison for drugs. Yeah, so who bringing the drugs by the container load and the shipment and the big shipments? Oh, all right. Let me get to a point here. So notice here, I'm going to read Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 before I read this. It says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon the holy city to finish transgression and to make an end of sin and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and the prophecy and to anoint the most holy. So if you notice that says what was about to happen to the Jews was a prediction of what Daniel had outlined again. And Daniel outlined that says there's a certain period of time the Jews has and this probation going to close. And after the probation close, we pick up in verse 26. And it says, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and upon the end of the war, desolation is determined. Right? So notice in verse 27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause sacrifice and oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abomination he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. All right. So notice that determined, this is very determined, whatever was going to happen was predicted, shall be poured upon the desolate. Who are the desolate? Well, the desolate people, the people who basically the glory has departed, Ikebab. So the destruction was going to be poured upon them because they're desolate. So when you see a person is desolate, they reject God, they reject anything. Don't believe that says their bad treatment of you is not going to come back to them. You rest assured that's going to come back. Now let's take up this thing and see if I can get to one other thing here. So the Jewish forces pursue, and this is from the book Great Controversy, first chapter, which is the destruction of Jerusalem. This is the desolation pouring upon the desolate. The Jewish forces pursuing after Cestius and his army fell upon their rear, and with such fierceness as to threaten them with total destruction. It was with great difficulty that the Romans succeeded to make their retreat. The Jews escaped almost without losses, and with their spoils returned in triumph to Jerusalem. Yet this apparent success brought them only evil. It inspired them with the spirit of stubborn resistance to the Romans, which speedily brought unutterable woe upon the doomed city. Terrible were the calamities that fell upon Jerusalem when the siege was resumed by Titus. The city was invested at the time of the Passover, when millions of Jews were assembled within its walls. Their stores of provision, which it carefully preserved, would have supplied the inhabitants for years, had previously been destroyed through jealousy and revenge of the contending factions, and now all the horrors of starvation were experienced. A measure of wheat were sold for a talent. So fierce were the pangs of hunger that men would gnaw the leather of their belts and sandals and covering of their shield. Great number of people would steal out at night to gather wild plants growing outside the city walls, though many were seized and put to death with cruel torture. Often those who returned in safety were robbed of what they had gleaned at so great peril. The most inhumane torture were inflicted by those in power to force from the wanted stricken people the last scanty supply which they might have concealed. And these cruelties were not infrequently practiced by men who were themselves well fed and who were merely desirous of laying up a store of provision for the future. Thousands perished from famine and pestilence. Natural affections seem to have been destroyed. Husbands robbed their wives, and wives their husband. Children would be seen snatching the food from the mouth of their aged parents. The question of the prophet, can a woman forget her suckling child? Received the answer within the walls of the doomed city. The hand of the pitying woman have sodden their own children. They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people. Isaiah chapter 49, verse 15. Lamentation chapter 4, verse 10. Again was fulfilled the warning prophecy given 14 centuries, 1,400 years before. The tender and delicate woman among you, which would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground for delicateness and tenderness. Her eye shall be evil towards the husband of her bosom, and towards her son, and towards her daughter, and towards her children, which she shall bear. For she shall eat them for want of all things secretly, in the siege and the straitness, wherewithal thine enemy shall distress thee in thy gates. Deuteronomy 28, verse 50, 6 and 59, 57. The Roman leaders endeavored to strike terror to the Jews and thus cause them to surrender. Those prisoners who resisted were taken, they were taken, were scourged, tortured, and crucified before the wall of the city. Hundreds were daily put to death in this manner, and the dreadful work continued until along the valley of Josaphat and at Calvary, crosses were erected in so great numbers that there was scarcely room to move among them. So terrible was visited the awful imprecation uttered before the judgment seat of Pilate, his blood be upon us and our children. Matthew chapter 27, verse 25. So there you can see one of a few important points there that you can see. Remember, they had lied on Christ and crucified Christ, right? What ended up happening? They were being crucified. And throughout the century, this has been something that's been repeated over and over upon them. So when you see them in their awful glory and they bombing people and killing people, they always don't see that this can come back. When you see they controlling the finance of the world and the corporate media they control, it always come back. It's a very interesting story, but they seem to never learn, right? Because that's what sin does. Titus would willingly put an end to the fierce scene and thus have spared Jerusalem the full measure of her doom. He was filled with horror as he saw the bodies of the dead lying in heaps in the valley. Like one entranced, he looked from the crest of Olivet upon the magnificent temple and gave command that not one stone of it should be touched. Before attempting to gain possession of this stronghold, he made an earnest appeal to the Jewish leaders not to force him to defile the sanctuary, the sacred place, with blood. If they would come forth and fight in any other place, no Roman should violate the sanctity of the temple. Josephus, the historian himself, in a most eloquent appeal, entreated them to surrender, to save themselves, their city, and their place of worship. But his words were answered with bitter curses. Darts were hurled at him, and their last human mediator, as he stood pleading with them. The Jews had rejected the entreaties of the Son of God, and now expostulation and entreaty only made them more determined to resist to the last. In vain were the efforts of Titus to save the temple. One greater than he had declared that not one stone shall be left upon another. The blind obstinacy of the Jewish leaders and the detestable crimes perpetrated within the besieged city excited the horror and indignation of the Romans. And Titus at last decided to take the temple by storm. He determined, however, that if possible, it should be saved from destruction. But his commands were disregarded. After he had retired to his tent at night, the Jews, sallying from the temple, attacked the soldiers without. In the struggle, a firebrand was flung by a soldier through the opening of the porch, and immediately the cedar-lined chambers about the holy house was in a blaze. Titus rushed to the palace, followed by the generals and legionnaires, and commanded the soldiers to quench the flames. His words were unheeded. In their fury, the soldiers hurled blazing brands into the chambers adjoining the temple, and then with the sword they slaughtered in great numbers, those who had found shelter there. Blood flowed down the temple steps like water. Thousands upon thousands of Jews perished. Above the sound of battle, voices were heard shouting, Ichabod, the glory had departed. Ichabod, the glory had departed. This happened once before, and this happened a second time. So when you see people in their glory oppressing people, remember they're going to turn and oppress each other. The environment in the first destruction of Jerusalem under Babylon was oppressive. The environment in the second destruction after they murdered Christ was oppressive amongst themselves. But when you see people oppressing, you normally assume, if you don't study history and you don't, observe society and families, that the oppression is going to stop at just the people they're oppressing. But normally they flip the oppression and they start to oppress each other. And that's why people believe in, because they believe it's not going to come to them. They don't believe their kids going to oppress them. Notice even the kids were oppressing their fellow human beings. And when you look at what was going on, remember now, because they were so internally oppressive to each other, they dropped the ball and they really couldn't defend themselves, even though they barricaded themselves in the city. If you remember what happened last year, it's almost the same thing to a certain degree. They were so busy fighting amongst each other that they could not really protect themselves because they had infighting, because they're oppressive against themselves. It's the same story repeated over and over again. When a person is oppressive, trust me, the history has shown over and over again that the oppression does not stop where you think it stopped. You would not think, as I say, that the worst, the worst states when it comes on to life expectancy, when it comes on to, money, when it comes on to social, when it comes on to health, would be the states that are the areas that probably will be more black. But look at the stats. The stats are amazing. Look at the place where drugs is running, poverty is running, all these things running. And you realize life outcomes are low. Why? Because oppression never stopped where it's supposed to stop. You assume it's supposed to. But so this is why people think, if you say certain things, you say, plead for the widow, the fatherless, the whatever. They think that's you're just pleading for one group of people. They don't understand. I'm pleading for just pleading sake. That because it never stopped. If you are oppressive, your kids are coming for you. Trust me. I've seen it over and over again. The kids will be oppressor. And so that's why Daniel is right. When Daniel says the prophecy of Daniel was fulfilled and is being fulfilled today, that he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, Daniel 9 verse 27. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause sacrifice and oblation to cease. After Christ died, sacrifice and oblation literally, slowly but surely cease globally. And for the overspreading of abomination, he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation. And that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. The people were desolate, and they said that word there, Ichabod, which is the glorious departed, is the people desolate, and they cry out, we desolate and we've been desolated. And they just got wiped because it's just wicked. They're oppressive. Now, one thing I'm going to share with you, and I probably have to go back to this on Tuesday because of the sake of time, because I'm out of time here. Started late. Sometimes just having some issues here. And one of the things is that you have observed is that if you look at what's going on in the society now, you see this concept here where, you think, okay, they say it's a capitalist system and so forth, but who's being capitalized? Who's being oppressed financially? And you say normally it's, foreign country, third world country, developed country. You say, okay, but are Americans being oppressed? And when you start looking into the data of what's going on, it's amazing how this oppressive system does not just oppress people in abroad, they oppress their own. And some of the things I've been looking at, if you look at the amount of spending, they said the American economy is what they call it, a consumer driven economy. But more and more that spending is done through credit. And the credit level is at an all time high. Because yes, the people are spending, but they're spending not income. They're blown through their income now. And now they're just spending on credit, and the credits are getting worse and worse, the amount of debt. And this is statistics. And I was going to read some of the statistics here, but as I say, I have to summarize some things before I leave here. I'll read it another time. Then another thing you have in is that I think it was yesterday. I can't remember if it was yesterday. I think it was yesterday that McDonald's came out with its earnings, and that McDonald's earnings, they having trouble because they're not making as much money because the price is too high. Well, not too high, but it's higher than it used to be, and less people are buying. So their earnings are not that strong, and their forecasts are not as strong. And also, I'm watching here this program, and they were talking about the Family Dollar, the CEO of Family Dollar, and I think Dollar Tree or Dollar General, one of them, that he's saying that they've gotten last quarter they've added I think 20-something thousand new customers, but many of those customers, a good percentage of those customers are people, families making over $125,000, which is amazing. So, in America, Family Dollar, Dollar Tree, Dollar General, these are stores that serve lower income communities and lower income people. But he's saying that they're finding more and more customers are shopping at those stores that makes over 120,000 US dollars, which is a lot of money that you think that says minimum they should be only shopping probably Walmart, Costco, higher, BJ's, and those bigger stores. But now they're looking for discounts. So more and more you find that the consumer is being treated as if they're not in the kingdom. They're in a third world nation. But you say, where this policy comes from? Where this concept come from? Because it's eat or be eaten. When you have a policy and you've been trained from you've been a child, and the system that you've been trained under is officially an oppressive system, and it tells you that you're survival of the fittest and that the weak is eaten to keep the strong alive, and you've been inculcated this from your child, then you're going to see it how it breaks itself out or play itself out in finances. It's going to play itself out in all kind of corporate stealing. And it doesn't mean that's because somebody say, there's no, listen, the corporations, and I have a program I'll do on this soon, they're not a financial juggernauts as they are. They're just pillagers. Because whenever they fail, they go to the government and say, bail us out. The government bail them out, and they fail again, and they say, bail us out. Where the government getting the money from? From the poor people who are suffering in West Virginia, Tennessee, like you keep going. New Jersey, New York, it doesn't matter. They keep bailing them out because they never learn. Because their system is oppressed. So why do they trust in oppression? Because they keep paying off. But as they keep eating the golden goose sooner they're not laying eggs. Now they're eating golden goose that are making over $100,000. And they still not paying an egg because they have so much credit. They have so much debt. And they're not doing anything about it because it's working for them. And whenever there's a economic crash, 2000, early 2000, 2008, 2000 through 2010, what happened at COVID, they just bail them out with PPE money. And then they say, oh, look, we give somebody $2,800 check. But they don't tell you how much they give the corporation. Because when you hear that, it's a crime. And the corporations then take the money, keep people hired for a little bit, and then just fire them and keep the profit. And the CEOs and the big upper echelon of the company keep just eating their own. But you think they're just eating people in foreign countries, but they're eating them here. And as I've covered last week, you look at so many communities, it's just death and destruction and desolation. And it's Ichabod, the glorious departed. Ain't nobody worried about that because the economy is doing well. Which economy?
As I said, the 10% of the society that invests in the stock market. I think they said 10% of society owns 80% of the stock market. So they say the economy is doing well. Well, which economy? You mean the 10% of the people invest in the stock market? Because the stock market is going up, but then there's ikebab going on in communities all over the country. And more people just can't even buy groceries and pay for rent and pay for their mortgage and their car. So what's going on? So we have to talk more about this. As I say, some things going on here. So we have some readjustment that we keep doing here, but we'll pray and then we'll connect and we'll talk more because this is not going nowhere. And this year, things are shaping up to get even worse for those even. Forget about the people in the poor; they're just gonna suffer much. But in the middle class, they're getting hit hard, and this is not gonna get better because again, the ravening wolves are circling the prey, and the prey really is in the middle class now. Yeah, they're taking them out. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, I thank you for your word in this day. I pray, dear Lord, that you may bless us as we walk humbly before thee. And may you continue to try to teach us your way that we can learn to be awake to what's going on in this world and protect ourselves. May you be with us, we pray, for Christ's sake. Amen. Well, thanks for being with me here on Revive Reform Radio. Looking forward to talking to you live again tomorrow when we should talk about natural health. Until then, I pray that you may continue to walk with the King.